$395. That's all it cost, at its lowest price, to buy the tractor that ended the age of the farm horse in America. Not a luxury machine for a wealthy estate, a tractor an ordinary working farmer could actually afford. Before this machine, a tractor was a luxury, heavy, expensive, something only a wealthy farmer or a big operation could justify. Henry Ford changed that in 1917, and the number behind it is staggering. By the mid-1920s, the Fordson accounted for roughly 3 out of every 4 tractors sold in the United States. In the next few minutes, you'll find out how Ford made it so cheap, the dangerous flaw that earned it the nickname the Widowmaker, and how a price war finally knocked it off the throne. Let's start with how it was built. Henry Ford grew up on a farm in Michigan, and he never forgot how hard the work was. By 1917, he had already transformed the automobile with the Model T and the moving assembly line. He turned that same method on the tractor. The tractor he designed, the Fordson Model F, went into production in 1917. And here's the key decision that made everything else possible. Ford built it on a moving assembly line, the same way he built cars, the first tractor in history to be mass-produced that way. The assembly line did 2 things at once. It drove the cost down dramatically because each worker repeated a single task instead of building a whole machine, and it let Ford build them faster than any competitor on Earth. While other tractor makers assembled their machines one at a time, by hand, in small batches, Ford was turning out Fordsons by the thousands every month. No one else in the industry could match that volume, and no one else could match that price. The second clever decision was in the design itself. Most tractors of the era used a heavy frame, a separate structural skeleton that everything bolted onto. Ford threw the frame away. Instead, the Fordson used what's called a unit frame, or frameless design. The engine, transmission, and rear axle housings were bolted together to form the structure of the machine themselves. No separate frame meant less material, less weight, and less cost. It was a genuinely innovative piece of engineering. The result was a small, light tractor about 2,700 pounds, far lighter than most competitors, powered by a 4-cylinder engine producing around 20 horsepower. Modest by later standards, but for a farmer who had been working behind horses, it was transformative. There was one more cost-saving touch worth knowing. The Fordson started on gasoline, but once the engine was warm, the operator could switch it over to run on kerosene, which was far cheaper than gasoline in the 1920s. For a farmer counting every dollar, a tractor that ran all day on the cheap fuel was part of the appeal. It was a machine designed, from the fuel up, to be affordable to operate, not just to buy. And that's the real story of the Fordson, not the engineering, but what it replaced. To understand why it mattered, you have to understand the animal it pushed off the farm. In 1917, American agriculture ran on horses and mules. A typical farm kept several draft animals, and those animals had to be fed every single day of the year, whether they were working or not. Feeding them consumed an enormous share of the farm's own land. Historians estimate that roughly a quarter of all American farmland was devoted not to growing food for people, but just to growing oats, hay, and corn to feed the working animals. That was land that produced no income at all. It simply kept the horses alive, so the horses could work the rest of the farm. A tractor didn't eat when it wasn't working. It didn't need a quarter of the farm planted in oats and hay just to keep it alive through the winter. Replace the horses with a Fordson, and a farmer could suddenly put all that feedland into cash crops instead: wheat, corn, cotton to sell. On top of that, the tractor could work longer hours than any animal, never tired, and never needed to rest in the heat. The economics were impossible for a working farmer to ignore. And the numbers show exactly that. USDA agricultural census data documents that the number of horses and mules on American farms peaked around 1918, right as the Fordson arrived, and then fell steadily for decades. The tractor was the cause. Timing helped too. The Fordson arrived just as the United States entered the First World War, and the war created exactly the conditions Ford's tractor needed. Millions of young men left the farms for the military. Labor grew desperately short, and food production became a national priority. A machine that let one person do the work that had required several, powered by an engine instead of scarce farmhands, was suddenly not just attractive, it was essential. Wartime demand pushed the Fordson onto American farms faster than almost anyone had expected. Ford pushed the price down relentlessly. The Fordson launched around $750, but Ford kept cutting, and during a price war in the early 1920s, the Fordson dropped to as low as $395. No other tractor on the market could come close. But the Fordson had a problem, and it was a deadly one. Remember that nickname I mentioned, the Widowmaker? Here's where it came from. The Fordson's light weight and its short wheelbase gave it a dangerous tendency. If the rear wheels caught on something solid, a buried rock, a stump, the edge of a ditch, and the driver gave it too much power, the front of the tractor could rear up and flip over backward, on top of the operator. It happened fast, faster than a person could react. And because the heavy machine landed on the driver, the accidents were frequently fatal. The Fordson killed enough operators over its production life that the grim nickname stuck and spread by word of mouth across farm country. This was not a rumor or an exaggeration. It was a real, documented design weakness, rooted in the same lightness and low cost that made the tractor so successful. The very things that made it cheap made it dangerous. The danger of rearward flips on early tractors like the Fordson is a direct ancestor of a piece of safety equipment you'll see on every modern tractor today, the rollover protection structure, the steel frame or cage around the operator. The lesson was learned the hard way. So if the Fordson was so cheap and so dominant, why isn't Ford the biggest tractor name today? The answer is a competitor who refused to fight Ford on price and beat him on design instead. The Fordson was a general-purpose plowing and belt power machine, but it was clumsy at one job that mattered enormously, cultivating row crops like corn and cotton between the rows, without crushing the plants. In 1924, International Harvester released the Farmall, a tractor designed specifically to do exactly that. The Farmall could do everything the Fordson did, plowing, belt work, and then cultivate row crops the Fordson couldn't touch. Suddenly, Ford's price advantage wasn't enough. Why buy the cheaper machine that did less when a slightly more expensive one did everything? Ford lost ground fast. By 1928, Ford stopped manufacturing the Fordson in the United States entirely, moving production overseas. The machine that had dominated American farming barely a few years earlier was gone from the domestic market, beaten not on price, but on what the machine could actually do. But don't mistake the Fordson's exit for failure. In just over a decade of American production, Ford built more than 750,000 of them and proved permanently that a tractor could be cheap enough for an ordinary working farmer to own. Before the Fordson, the tractor was a rich operations tool. After it, the tractor was simply a tool, the way a plow or a wagon was a tool. Every affordable tractor that came after it, including the Farmall that beat it, followed the path the Fordson cut. It didn't win the long race, but it started it. The Fordson is also one of the more findable vintage tractors today, precisely because Ford built so many. Restorers prize them, and a running Fordson is a regular sight at vintage farm shows across the country. The Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, holds documented examples. That's the documented story of the Fordson, the tractor Henry Ford made cheap enough to change American farming forever, flaws and all. The machine that put a horse-powered nation on engine power, one $395 tractor at a time. If this kind of documented equipment history is what you come here for, subscribe to The Quiet Farmer. In the comments, tell us, did your family ever run a Fordson? We'd like to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.